All right, Jim. So before we go, our last topic, which is a recurring bit, this is a quicker one, I think, depending on how you answer.
Well, you're just dropping
But
this on me, so we'll see.
so for overrated, underrated gaming magazines, I was actually inspired as right before we were about to end, I was changing my camera battery, and I look over and I have the biggest goddamn stack of Game Informers that I haven't looked at ever in years. Like I used to get them, read them, whatever. But we know there's been like Nintendo Power is really popular. Like I think Nintendo Power and Game Informer is always the top two most popular for me personally. And yeah, I mean at this day and age, taking into full context, do you think they're overrated or underrated? So I want to get your take first.
I mean, if we're talking about today, overrated, underrated almost doesn't apply. They're just unnecessary. But like, I still have my GameStop fucking membership, and they're like, oh, do you want Game Informer shipped to your house or online? I'm just like, just give me the email version. I'm not gonna read it anyway. So, I mean,
So that's where I thought maybe I thought yes,
I used to read
they
them.
are unnecessary for sure. But the collector in you, like I know you love collecting, and even for someone like me, I look at this pile and I'm like, I just don't want to keep it anymore. Like it just it is so unnecessary. But I know a lot of people like they grow up with Nintendo Power is usually the most reference. Like it was highly necessary back in the day because NES games were really just a means of selling that magazine because you couldn't finish a game without knowing how to do a lot of shit in a lot of the games. So they were absolutely necessary in the past. Now they're completely
Unnecessary.
not necessary.
But
But is there something to be said? It's the same as saying like, do you like collecting books physically or do you want them on your Kindle or iPad?
no, here. All right, I have an answer. I'm gonna go with underrated, and I'm gonna go with underrated based on our buddy Castle Zotz, because one of my favorite things that he does is people will talk about a game and say it's a hidden gem or say it's a game that got like no promotion, and he'll be like, "No promotion, motherfucker! That was the cover of Nintendo Power this one month," and he'll like immediately like be able to like spout off the top of his head. So like the magazines are really I'll say they're underrated because they're such a good time capsule. They're one of those things you can go back and see exactly what people were talking about back in the day, or what games truly were hidden gems, or just ones that like people like to say in this day and age that, oh, no one knew about this when it got like nines across the board and was like critically acclaimed and shit like that. So yeah, I'll say underrated just for like their historical context. Like I remember growing up as a kid, like my parents weren't going to spend money on me having a magazine subscription, but I like my best friend had EGM, and I would love going over to his house and reading his EGMs. And hell, even before I lived in even when I lived in my apartment for a bit, like Game Informer was great poop reading. So especially for me, like a guy who spends a good chunk of time on the toilet,
You spend way too much time in the bathroom in general.
it was a perfect companion. So yeah, I'll say underrated, especially for the historical context of them. Even though like Nintendo Power really is like the only one that anyone cares about collecting.
Yeah, and that's so the other thing that really sparked me from not only seeing my pile, but do you ever go on Facebook Marketplace?
Yeah.
So I just randomly go on there sometimes. I mean, for any random shit, video games, whatever. This dude had the balls, and I don't even know how many copies it was. Let's say it was a stack of 50 Game Informers. And this motherfucker was trying to sell them for like $80. Like some ridiculous price for something that nobody fucking cares about or wants. And it's not like he had them sleeved or anything.
It's actually not a terrible price, but it's also like a thing no one wants.
But that's my point. It is a terrible price because $80 for 50 copies of a magazine that nobody cares about. And once again, they weren't
$5 a copy, right? Come on, you can't beat that.
But they're not even preserved properly. It's like literally like just they were just sitting in his room.
Yeah.
Like I don't know.
No,
like,
that is pretty egregious. Because I mean, like even for a collector like me, I threw all mine the fuck out. I didn't give a shit.
Well, and I'm getting to that point. Like I have on a spot where they don't bother me that much, but one day it just will be. Like you said, could they be a good time capsule,
Sure.
yes. But on the same page, it's kind of like collecting old newspapers. You know that shit gets archived, and especially nowadays, digitized. You can find a digital copy of these magazines if you really care that much. If you just happen to have them physically in hand, it's literally like anything you have physically in hand. I don't think you get any enhancement from having them. But yeah, I figured you as a collector maybe skewed more towards thinking they were underrated. But that's at least an interesting way that you're putting it as a time capsule.
It's actually funny because when you talk about that, I was going through some old boxes and throwing shit out the other day, and I remember I held on to fucking. You know what? I never held on to gaming magazines or shit that I did have. I held on to WWF magazines forever. And I finally threw them out like about maybe the bulk of them maybe like 6 years ago or something like that. But I think I still have like one or two randomly like lying around for whatever reason. And I was like, man, like you want to talk about a time capsule? One, holy shit, and two, it's like I was holding on to a magazine for fake storylines for play fighting thing, but
yeah, that's.
I really needed
But
I really needed those Vic Venom editorials before he took over creative.
But collecting is in your blood, Jim, so it makes sense.
Yeah, but even I have my limits. I was just like, oh God, why? Oh, I was like, why do I still have this? And even that, I'm like, all right, I can part ways with this.